Kuzizampola. My name is Charmi Cheda and I work with the Royal Academy of Performing Arts, and you are watching Heart Bhutan Healing Through the Arts. And today I have another healing activity, and that is book reading. I urge all parents, guardians, adults in the house to read together, to read for your children, as it has so many positive impacts. These videos are specially brought to you during a time that is tough for all of us, and that is why the book that I have chosen today is just so perfect. If you hear every word, if you really soak yourself into it, there will be so much of calmness after the whole book is done. So try and listen and watch the entire video if you can. And I would also urge parents to please ask your children to sit with a diary, a book, a pencil, any words, anything that they don't understand. Maybe they can write it down and then ask you about it later. So let me start with the book. First, I would like to tell you that I'm so honored and privileged to be reading this book. It's very special. I've read it before and I can't get enough of it. There's just so much in it, so much wisdom and so much knowledge. So the book I've chosen today is very special. It is The Raven Tells a Story. The Raven Tells a Story is written by none other but Her Royal Highness Ashi Sonam Dechan Wangchuck. And I would like to thank Ajila for such a wonderful book. It's such a gift to the people of Bhutan. This book is dedicated to the father of our Constitution, His Majesty Jimmy Singay Wangchuck. Chapter 1. The Curious Book. I am Singay. I am 13 years old and the youngest member of my family. My grandparents, father, mother, sister, and I live together in a little village in Bhutan. Today, I will tell you a story of the day I began my discovery of our Constitution. It started out as a morning like any other in my village. A rooster heralded the start of the day with his triumphant call, rousing people of our village from their sleep. The sun slowly creeping up the mountains revealed village houses lighting up in succession, like butter lamps being lit in the darkness of a temple room. Smell of incense filled the air as soothing chants from the family altar room slowly merged with bustle of activity in the kitchen. It was the first day of school. After the holidays, and anxious to meet my friends, I had gotten up hours too early and ended up being the first to reach school that morning. As I waited impatiently, sitting in an empty classroom, surrounded by empty chairs and a clean blackboard facing me, I noticed a newspaper idly lying on my class teacher's table with a headline, "Interpreting the Constitution." I picked up the newspaper and read the article, but I found it difficult to understand. I hurriedly put the newspaper back on my teacher's desk as I saw the first glimpses of shiny school shoes of eager students entering the classroom. As the school bell rang, I sat impatiently in my chair, waiting to catch my beautiful class teacher, Miss Sirim's attention. It felt like forever until the lesson ended and break was called. I darted out of my classroom, followed her, and asked, "Ma'am, what is a constitution and what does interpreting a constitution mean?" She looked at me, paused, and then smiled as she answered in her sweet and gentle voice, Singe, the Constitution is a sacred document of values that we agree to live by, and interpreting it means understanding and explaining it. I politely thanked her for her answer, but there was so much more I wanted to know. I remember my sister telling me stories of how the king visited Wangchuck to discuss the constitution with the people. She had gone with Appa and Ai to see and listen to the great king. I was too young to attend the historic meeting and was left at home with my grandparents. My sister has told me the story of that meeting over 100 times on my request, that I feel as if I had been there too. My family and neighbors would debate the need for this constitution and speak of the changes it would bring. At the time, we could not understand why the king was giving up his powers to the people. I hurried home that evening to look for my Ajimo. I always turned to her for answers to the difficult questions. I found her in the kitchen helping Age prepare dinner. I begged her to tell me more about the Constitution, but she was busy and ignored my pleas. Then I turned to my Age and pleaded with him to tell me what the Constitution meant to him. But he looked tired and didn't answer. So I decided to wait until the morning. As darkness set in and we turned in for the night, I lay awake, unable to put my mind to rest. I decided that sleep would not come tonight for me if I didn't find some answers. Quietly getting out of bed, I examined the room I shared with my grandparents. The altar room, lit with the light of a single butter lamp, revealed them to be sound asleep. I saw a curious book lying neatly wrapped in a sacred silk scarf, almost luminous in the golden lamplight. I tiptoed up to the altar, making sure not to wake my grandparents, and quietly picked up the book. Now holding the book securely in my hands, I began to unravel the white silk. My heart raced with excitement as I started to read, hoping to learn the untold stories stored between its pages. I read myself to sleep. Chapter 2. The Raven Tells a Story. That night, I dreamt of a beautiful raven in a majestic flight against the backdrop of a clear blue sky. I was standing in an endless field of golden barley, and all around me was silence. A sudden breeze descended, rustling the barley. It called out to me, Singe, Singe, I have stories to tell you if you care to listen. I could not believe it. I rubbed my eyes to make sure I was awake and answered in a whisper, I love stories. The raven pointed out to a large stone placed perfectly in the center of an open field and asked me to sit down. It perched itself in front of me and said, I have seen many things in my time, and I have many stories, but the one I want you to hear today is the story of our Constitution. The Constitution of Bhutan is unique in its beginnings, and as it represents the legacy of a great monarch, and it exists to fulfill the deepest hopes and dreams of the Bhutanese people. Do you remember the newspaper you saw on your teacher's table? The raven asked. I nodded and replied, the one about interpreting the Constitution? The raven continued, the Constitution will develop and evolve over time, but what is unchanging are the value it holds. This is the heart of the Constitution. It is our people who give the the Constitution life, as they must decide to live by the truths and values written down in the document. Maybe you would now like to know what values we agreed to live by. But first, you must understand the history of the Constitution. So let us start our story with how the Constitution came into being. The story begins with a vision of a great monarch. His Majesty Jimmy Singye Wangchuck, the fourth king of Bhutan, was once a young boy like you. He lost his father at a young age, and his childhood was set aside for the responsibilities of kingship. At the dawn of his teenage years, he succeeded his father. In his royal speech to the people of Bhutan, 5 days after the death of his father, he said that he hoped to serve his kingdom and his people to the best of his ability and with all his heart and soul for as long as possible. And this he did. He had a clear vision for Bhutan, and he led the country through its darkest time with strength and courage. He led by example, and through his hard work, careful preparation, patience, and understanding brought Bhutan to its golden age. This young king spoke of Bhutan's sovereignty and the need for the Bhutanese people to rely on ourselves. He believed that Bhutan's future should be in the hands of the people. All through his reign, he spoke of the people's participation in creating a common future and how important it was for the people to work with the government to achieve our national goals. The Bhutan that existed during the start of this monarch's reign and the Bhutan that we know now, one that was handed over to us, is very different. During this time, the young king shouldered great responsibility and envisioned a dream for Bhutan. Through his political thought and his deep understanding of his people's needs and hopes, the young king infused new ideas into Bhutanese society and into the minds of the Bhutanese people. With profound thought and reflection, he determined what would be the best form of government for Bhutan. How amazing it is for a king to give up power and for over 2 decades nurture democracy so that it would set deep and strong roots in Bhutan. It was a process that took over 25 years of preparation to encourage and educate our people to participate actively in helping to make decisions in the governing of the country. The timing was right too, and the right conditions had been set for these important changes because under the king's guidance, Bhutan had become more stable, prosperous, and peaceful than even before. Over the course of 4 years, His Majesty the 4th Druk Gyalpo studied the draft constitution submitted by a 39-member constitution drafting committee and revised it over 20 times before a final draft was approved and sent to the Assembly for discussion. His Majesty the 4th King and His Majesty the 5th King, who was then Chitse Penlop, discussed the constitution with the people of all 20 districts of the kingdom to hear their views and to explain what the constitution meant to us. The constitution of the Kingdom of Bhutan is not simply a gift from His Majesty the 4th King Jimmy Singye Wangchuck. It is the collection of the finest values and ideas to create a system of government that would ensure the best chance for Bhutan's progress and stability. A generation of Bhutanese inherited these values and agreed to this document we call the Constitution. It is a statement of their faith in a great leader's vision and hopes for Bhutan's future as a nation. I pay tribute to this great king for serving Bhutan so wisely and loyally. And I want you to know how lucky I am to have witnessed such selflessness in the service of the nation. May it inspire you and guide you on your journey as a citizen of Bhutan. I found myself now standing on the rock as I watched the raven disappear into the clear blue sky. I was overwhelmed with emotion and deep in thought about what the raven had told me. I closed my eyes. The gentle rays of morning sunlight felt warm on my face as I awoke to find myself lying on the floor of the family altar room. Still holding the Constitution in my hand, I will always be grateful to the raven for the special story, which I will always remember as I go through life. The night I met the raven is when my journey began. Chapter 3. Why do we need a constitution? Almost certain that I was still dreaming, I pinched myself to make sure I was awake. I got out of bed and even looked around for any signs of the raven. As I safely placed the Constitution book back on the altar, I felt a surge of excitement over what had just happened to me. I quickly wore my go and hurried to Wangel's house to fetch him to go to school. Wangel is my best friend. I found him outside his house patiently waiting for me as he did every morning. He's a thin boy with expressive eyes that always revealed his every emotion. He was as usual dressed neatly, hair combed to one side and with a shiny gleam of a satisfactory breakfast glistening on his lips. As we set off together, I was not sure whether I should tell Wangel about my dream. I wondered if he would laugh at me or whether anyone would believe me if I told them of a raven that had spoken to me. A talking raven, they would say, and maybe they would call me the soothsayer. So I decided to keep this to myself and wait for another dream perhaps. All I knew was that I had newfound desire to learn as much as I could about the Constitution, its importance, and why we needed one. Wangel walked alongside me, loudly singing a song from the Bhutanese movie we had watched over our holidays. I quickened my steps to walk ahead of him, hoping for a moment of silence in which I could think about what I had heard in my dream. As I recalled the calm voice of the raven, it drowned out the awful singing voice of my best friend. I felt I was on a special quest to discover the secret of the Constitution. But I thought to myself, why did the raven pick me to tell this incredible story? Many questions about the Constitution came flooding into my mind. We functioned without a constitution for so long, so why did need a constitution? Does a constitution change us? I looked back and waited for Wangel as he skipped through the fields to catch up with me, and we walked together to school. As Miss Rim entered our classroom after morning assembly, I asked her why we needed a constitution. Today she seemed more inspired and answered, Singe, the Constitution creates a unique system of democracy by specifying, structuring, and balancing the powers and duties among various people such as kings, ministers, members of parliament, judges, and so on. As a written document, it can also serve as a reminder of our values, rights, duties, and national goals. The Constitution shows us the path. Does that help? She asked, looking expectantly at me. I nodded, feeling a small sense of accomplishment on my special quest. Ma'am raised her voice so that the whole classroom could hear. She said that she would bring us all a copy of the Constitution the next morning, so we could read it together and discuss what we understood and what we didn't. Wangel sat right behind me in class. I looked back at him and grinned, expected him to share my enthusiasm to read and learn about the Constitution. But Wangel looked uninterested and showed no signs of excitement. Next morning, as promised, we were each handed a printout copy of the Constitution. It wasn't a book as expected, but it would do. It held the same words, and even though it didn't look as grand as the book that lay magnificently on my family altar, it was mine. I looked through the Constitution once again, this time armed with a pen. I noted down everything I wanted to know more about. I scribbled into my notebook words such as sovereignty, justice, harmony, unity, and good governance. With these questions, I confidently entered my class the next morning. Miss Sirim looked at me and then pointed past me to Wangel to ask him what he had found. Wangel nervously looked down at his constitution and read out what he had scribbled on the margins. Ma'am, we are the nation of the gross national happiness, but why is it that the Constitution does not say that? The tip of the Wangel's ears turned pink, and then his face suddenly took on a bright red hue, as he looked around the room to examine if he had said the right thing. I smiled at Wangel to assure him and thought to myself, why I hadn't thought of that. Miss Sirim, in a loud and excited voice, exclaimed, "Yes, Wangel, good, very good. That is the question. Now, isn't it?" Wangel smiled broadly, wiping the sweat off his brow. He looked relieved. "Now, Singe, what have you come up with?" she said, as she looked at me and smiled. "I will address all your questions after hearing from all of you." She quickly added. I stood up and said, "The first thing I read was Bhutan is a sovereign kingdom, and the sovereign power belongs to the people of Bhutan. What does sovereign mean? And what powers do we have?" Miss Sirim patiently listened to all our questions and then took a deep breath and began. "First, let me begin with the story of our nation." She pointed at the map of Bhutan and said Bhutan was a young nation living between two giants. As she said, she had a mischievous look on her face. Then she called out three names, Kado, Chenda, and Singe. She asked me to stand in between my two very large and strong classmates, Kado and Chenda. They teasingly looked intently at me and even flexed their muscles. And to be honest, I was a little scared. Kado was China and Chenda was India. And I, the smallest boy in my class, was Bhutan. "Are you feeling a little uncomfortable, Singe?" Ma'am asked, as the whole class roared with laughter. She then continued, "Because of developments in the region, Bhutan knew it must keep it very special traditional culture and develop a strong sense of national identity. Bhutan's survival as a nation depended on its ability to understand its weaknesses and to work towards strengthening its strength." Miss Sirim continued, "Sovereignty is the freedom from influence and lawful authority, the right to rule and make rules. For example, as a sovereign country, we could choose the kind of relationships and agreements we want to have with other countries for trade and for keeping our country secure and peaceful. The Constitution is the source of our legal and rightful existence as a nation. That is where the power lies." As for happiness, what makes you happy, Wangel? Wangel, without hesitation this time, replied, "Eating momos after watching the latest movie in town with my best friend Singe." As the class burst into laughter, Wangel quickly added, "Hearing my mother say she's proud of me." "Now, is that what makes you happy, class?" Miss Sirim exclaimed. Happiness is the ultimate driving force of human desire. We all desire happiness. But what gives each of us personal happiness is different. What the Constitution gives us is the balance and the values and priorities that will enable and enhance the greatest good of all, and that is the unity, well-being, and contentment of ourselves and of our people. The Constitution says that the government will do their best to promote conditions which will enable the pursuit of gross national happiness. We have many laws in our country, but the supreme law is the Constitution. It is the grand collection of all our laws, policies, and priorities, hopes, and values of the land. The Constitution came to us in a time of peace to create a system that was best suited for our people. The Constitution is a safeguard designed to keep us on a balanced and harmonious path. The structure, principles, and values of the Constitution guides us towards a shared understanding of our direction and goals as a society. Keep asking questions and keep learning. Miss Sirim drew a long breath and ended her lesson. Chapter 4: An Education. Our house was full of activity as my sister, who I lovingly call Ajimo, was leaving for Thimphu to live with my aunt to attend high school. I'm especially close to my Ajimo, and I wasn't happy at the thought of not having her around. My family is seated in a circle in our family room, crowding around my Ajim. We were to share an early breakfast before my Ajim's departure to the capital city, and all our eyes were focused on her as if trying to remember her every move and memorize her every feature. I sat close to her as I eagerly waited for my Ange to bring in her famous, mouth-watering, delicious sikampa that she prepared on special occasions or when she was in an especially good mood. Today was a combination of both. My sister was leaving our village for higher studies. She would go live with our aunt, who was a teacher in the city. My family had many hopes for her, and today marked the beginning of her journey. A small and cozy family room where we gathered each day to share our meals and our stories looked and felt different that day. As we sat closely together, looking at each other's faces, there were no words, but a growing silence that had filled the room. My parents and grandparents noticed this and almost immediately began recalling their youth and the hardships they had faced, and of their disbelief in how our country had changed so much since then. My Ange, a small, feisty lady, placed the awaited dish protectively in front of herself and sat down. She lamented, "Times have changed." I lifted the lid of the dish and peeked in, taking in the wonderful smells of grandmother's cooking, and my hands dove into the steaming pot for a taste, for which I was greeted by a stinging slap on my wrist. I gave a sweet smile of apology to my grandmother and then asked her what she meant about times having changed. Ange served all of us pairing portions of a delicious specialty and saved the biggest share for Ajimo. It was my mother, rather than my grandmother, who answered my question. Ai was the undisputed big boss of her family. In a commanding voice that shook us all out of the silent and contented food coma we were in, she roared, "You are all so spoiled these days. We face real hardship in our days." She then continued, "Schools at your doorstep and now the power to choose governments." I looked at Ajimo and she gave a knowing smile as we both knew where this talk was heading. Any look of disagreement or disapproval would have put a damper on the last day I had with Ajimo, so I sat patiently and listened. I continued, "Your grandparents, your father and I are farmers. We can recite our prayers but cannot read or write. The kings themselves discuss the constitution with the people of all the 20 Dzongkhags. It was like a family sitting together, much like we are, and discussing our fears, hopes, and dreams. Our people appealed to the king that they did not want an unknown and untried system when they were comfortable and happy with the way things were. We were unsure whether democracy would unify us or divide us. The king calmed the people, saying that democracy was cultivated over a period of time and given to the people at a point when they were mature and educated enough to take ownership. We were afraid of change, but it was because of the shared belief and trust we had in our king that we consented. It was an emotional day for our people. We left with such mixed emotions. Ai's stern voice became softer, and then I saw something I rarely see. Tears were rolling down her face as she quickly turned away to conceal the sign of weakness. Appa interrupted Ai, something he rarely ever did. He looked at my mother as if seeking her approval and then said, "Change is always difficult to accept. The seeds of democracy were sown, and slowly with time it grew with constant care and attention. And now we see a young tree whose roots are growing deeper and wider and stronger. I now see that change was brought about so that we would take this tree as our own, look after it and protect it." Appa then looked towards Ashimo and I and continued, "It is your education that will take what we have further by giving you the understanding to make the right choices and to be responsible for those choices. The two of you must use your knowledge and education for the good of your people and country by contributing in a meaningful way." We all hugged my sister one last time as she left our small house and our village. Chapter 5. What we value. My best friend Wongel is gentle and patient, which balances out my impatient and often hasty nature. His mother, Wongmo, is a tough lady who commands the respect of our community. She raised Wongel and his much older brother as a single parent. The way she dotes completely on her youngest child, Wongel, we often forget that she's also mother to the young and newly elected Gup. Wongel always came to school with a special packed lunch that was tasty and often envied by all. One day at school during lunch break, Wongel's lunch box went missing. Two boys from the neighboring village who had just joined the school were caught enjoying the last mouthfuls of the lunch behind the old classroom building. The boys were called aside by our class teacher and asked to explain their misdeeds. They said the long walk to school early in the morning without breakfast made them very hungry, and even if it was wrong to steal Wongel's lunch, they were so hungry they felt it was all right to eat it. Wongel looked at me and said he would have shared his lunch if only they had asked him. Miss Sirim, although gentle, had no tolerance for such indiscipline and immediately wanted to meet Principal Tandon to decide a suitable punishment for the two boys. Wongel reasoned that since the two boys had skipped breakfast and were overcome by hunger, they should not be punished this once. In fact, Wongel and I suggested to Miss Sirim that students could form groups and share their packed lunches. Our class teacher agreed to our suggestion and decided to consult Principal Tandon, who also agreed to this arrangement. At morning assembly the next day, he announced that from now on the children would form groups and share their lunches. Miss Sirim was not happy. She demanded that the two boys understood right from wrong and apologized to Wongel by bringing him a lunch to replace the one they had eaten. She explained it was a fair solution where all can gain through helping each other. Principal Tandon was a serious man with little humor, but was adored by students as he always looked out for us like a parent. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, we all listened. Today he chose to address the assembly with some advice. What is it we value as a society? He asked in a firm and solemn voice. We all listened with attention and felt the seriousness of the occasion. Honesty, sir, said one. Justice, said another. Unity and harmony, loyalty and family, said others. Principal Tandon then said, parents teach values each day, unknowingly or knowingly. We are also taught values in our schools from friends and teachers. The right values will hold you in good stead as you develop into good and productive citizens. We will have succeeded if all of you understand what these values are and what is important for us as an individual, as a family, as a community, and as a Bhutanese. These values are passed down from one generation to the next as we strive to live together in peace, unity, and cooperation. Think about that as you all return home today. As I reached home that day, my parents also returned from the fields after a long day at work. My grandparents' prayers abruptly ended as I entered the door of our modest house. Soon my family surrounded me and I was sure I was in some sort of trouble. My mother quickly wiped off the dirt from her hands, and from the folds of her kira emerged a white envelope. In an excited voice, she asked, "Open it quickly, Singe. A letter from your Ajim. Read it out to us." I ripped open the envelope and read, "My dear Nuchu Singe, I have settled into my new surroundings and I am well. Tell Age and Ange that I miss their cooking. Auntie's cooking is good, but the food just doesn't taste the same. I live with Auntie in a huge building in the heart of Thimphu city. The city is large and crowded. The first night I hardly slept. I was kept awake with the loud noises of ferocious vehicles, but more than that, distracted with quiet thoughts of home. My first day at my new school was an experience. The walk to my high school is an adventure in itself. I passed through the busy city, crossing a great bridge, all the while dodging traffic, and although it is only a 15-minute walk, I'm exhausted. I miss our village. I miss dragging you out of bed to get to school every morning. I miss Age's stories, Ange's songs from her youth, and watching Appa and Ai with their friends in the fields, enjoying their shared lunch to break the monotony of a long work day. I dream of the stream that bubbles along our village, the avenue of pine that hides our secret spot behind our home, and even our neighbor's annoying rooster that wakes us up an hour too early. I see our ways of life are so different in the city and in our village. I am surrounded by buildings and people in this large city, but yet I feel alone. Auntie is good to me, but she's always busy, and although we live in the same house, our lives seem to be moving in different directions. I worry about the future. Change is coming even to us, and I worry about who will take care of Age and Ange, and even Appa and Ai, once you two leave our village. It is expensive in the city, and I know Appa and I are working very hard for the extra money they send me every month, and I worry about them. Your exams are approaching soon. Study hard and try and do your best. Are you still hounding people with all your questions? Don't stop. Maybe you will become a detective or even a politician someday. Ask Appa to take you to the great temple to see our protecting deity's protection. It will be worth the effort. Take care of each other. All my love, Ajimo. My parents tried to hide the look of worry they had on their faces to hear of my sister's new life in the city. My Ajimo was facing a different kind of hardship, one that came from her new life away from home. We were lost in our thoughts when all of a sudden my grandparents pulled me aside with a naughty grin, said together, "MP Singh, you definitely have our vote." The mood in our small family room was once again filled with hope, and we all laughed and rejoiced in the moment. I thought about what Principal Tandon told us that morning. I watched my grandparents sleep soundly that night and saw how peaceful and beautiful my village looked at night through my window. That night, I started making a mental list of what my family, my village, and my country's values and hopes meant to be and meant to me. I value so much, I thought. Chapter 6, Our Vote. This year, my school decided the students themselves would elect the school captain. This got us very excited as we had seen our elders vote during the last big election and the local election. We had come of age and were being given the right to vote. Even if it was only for the post of our school captain, we took this on with much importance. It has been a few weeks into school and there are already 3 candidates for the coveted top post, including Wangel, my friend. Wangel was the first to put his name up for the post and promised to make me school vice captain if he was elected. Dorji was a senior and the most popular girl at her school. She was the strongest candidate and a fiercest contender, as she was self-confident, an active participant in school life, and very good in her studies. Pasa, the third candidate, was new to our school and being little known, had backed out from running after being convinced by Dorji to join her team with the promise of being made vice captain. All of us knew that we must go first to our schoolmates to understand their needs before we could start. During lunch breaks and after school, we would talk to our classmates and schoolmates about their lives, family, and hardships. Some of our classmates had to walk for hours each morning to get to school. They would be awoken very early in the morning to walk, often on empty stomachs, to get to school each day. I felt guilty at the thought of my easy mornings. Wangel and I promised school lunches to be provided by the school. We encouraged share lunches, better sports equipment, and sports activities for better health. More books for the school library, and a volunteer service to help the elders of our village. Dorji has also realized this need and planned school lunches for the children to be made with fresh vegetable supply from our village to help our families make some extra income, and even the proposal to make the footpath to our school safer for the children. The big debate was to be held after morning assembly the following week. The students were to vote for their choice of school captain immediately after. As the days drew nearer for the debate, we spoke to our classmates and friends, and they reassured us of their promise of votes. Wangel and I spent many nights after school discussing a strategy for the big debate. Wangel was not the best of public speakers, but had a genuine nature, and I was sure that he would do well. Wangel had made up his mind about not going to his mother or his Achu, the Gap, for any advice or help. He worried what people would say about him being the Gap's baby brother. The day had arrived and I woke up even before the rooster's morning call. I dressed in my school uniform my grandmother had laid out and took extra care to look smart that day. I found Appa in front of our house picking pears from our old pear tree. He asked me to wait as he gently wiped 13 pears and wrapped them in a red cloth for me to take to school. Appa laughed and said, "Too late to bribe your friends now." And then he continued, "Whatever happens today, I'm glad that you are growing up to be a responsible young boy. And I know that your thirst for learning will take you far. I hugged the red bundle of pears in my arms and I raced to Wongel's with a great sense of pride and comfort from my father's words and gesture. Wongel and his mother were waiting for me. Wongmo looked flushed and spoke very quickly, and I was taken aback to see her in such a state. Wongel looked unusually calm as we bid his frantic mother farewell and made our way to school. The debate was after our morning assembly, and both Wongel and Dorji spoke well. As the students lined up to vote for their choice, we watched from a distance, maintaining our composure, while our hearts raced wildly inside our chest. The results were announced only in the evening. This day seemed endless. Principal Tandon slowly made his way towards the students, all waiting to hear the result of the election. He cleared his throat and announced, "Dorji has been selected by the students as school captain." This was followed by a sudden outburst of applause and celebration, to which Principal gave a quick and firm clap of his hands, signaling us to quiet down, and then continued, "Wongel, Singe, Dorji, Pasa, you are all to be applauded, for you have thought about what your fellow students needed and you all felt you could contribute. This is only the beginning. Now you all must work together to achieve something good." I looked at Wongel and instinctively gave him a big hug. We were not to be school captains, but we accepted the collective wishes of our schoolmates. I brought out my parcel of 13 pears my father had lovingly packed for me, and I offered our new school captain some. We had learned so much from this experience of the realities of the lives of our fellow students, their hardships, and of their hopes. Wongel and I promised to help Dorji and Pasa that day. Chapter 7. Guardians. The great temple is the spiritual home of our local deity, the protector we seek refuge in, and whose protection we pray for in times of need. We turn to our deities in times of trouble, and we place our faith in them to bring order into our lives. When it is time for examinations, parents and children alike are unified in their wishes and prayers for good results, and so they seek the blessing of our protecting deity. The morning bus took my appa and I to the great temple. After a long wait outside the temple under the burning sun with crying babies and worried parents, a test of patience for the devout, I finally made it into the presence of our guardian. With my head bowed low, I looked at the image of our guardian, and overwhelmed with devotion and faith, I made a wish. All too quickly, the monk, who was pestered by the crowd of impatient devotees waiting their turn, quickly ushered my father and I out. I looked back at the sacred temple with its aura of power and beauty, and I asked myself, who are the guardians of our constitution? I returned home from the long bus ride, a little dizzy and exhausted from the journey, and headed straight to my grandparents' room to take a nap. As I lay on the mattress and awaited sleep, my mind was busy with questions. I looked at the picture of our kings on the altar table, and I imagined what the raven would tell me if I had asked him this. We have many protectors and deities in our country. We go to them for reassurance and to seek their blessings. But what do they exist for? I then pulled out the printout copy of the Constitution from under my pillow and read that the Supreme Court, the highest court of the land, is the guardian of the Constitution. The Supreme Court would uphold the Constitution and is the guardian of its values. At the great temple, I had wished for the guardians to protect my family and to look out for my sister. Then I made a wish for a good result from my examinations. I thought of all the wishes being made that day, and if they were all granted, I wondered if bigger wishes were more important than the smaller ones. Do the guardian deities exist for us or because of us? There is a picture on my family altar, one I liked very much. It shows our present king as a young child around my age, listening to his father. I imagine the words of advice His Majesty Afodruk Gelpo gave and the impact it must have had on our king as a young boy and how it must have shaped his thinking. Maybe he told his son a story that day, a story about a good leader who set an example for all future leaders by putting national interest above all else in thought and action, and led an exemplary life in the service to our nation. Maybe it was a story about the Constitution and how it would serve to promote and protect the present and future well-being of the people and the country. Just as I was imagining myself eavesdropping into a scene of a father telling his son a great story, I had hardly noticed my grandfather's presence in the room. Age looked at me lying there on the mattress and said, "Singe, daydreaming again? What was it about this time?" he asked. I got up and told him of the bumpy bus journey, of the great temple, and of the wish I had made. I knew my Age would be the best person to answer my question, so I began. Age, how do deities grant wishes and why do they exist? Age sat down next to me and with a warm pat on my head from his still muscular and big hands that always made me feel safe and protected, he said, "They are symbols of something higher and greater, and they work together to fulfill small wishes such as personal hopes and dreams for the greater good and protection of the country and all living beings. They exist to protect us for peace of mind and to give us hope." As he finished saying that, he rose and his warm presence left the room. I looked at the Constitution once again and read that the Druk Gelpo shall protect and uphold the Constitution in the best interests and for the welfare of the people of Bhutan. I also read that the king is the symbol of unity. Good government can come only if we have good leaders, I thought. If we put our faith and trust in the institution of monarchy as a symbol of unity, and we look at all the measures in the Constitution for good governance, then the safeguards are set to ensure stability, and that future kings and elected governments best serve the nation and the people. Chapter 8. What is right? What is duty? My village may be small, but our community lives together like one large family. It is our annual choku, and our small house is the epicenter of all activity, infused with life and attracting everyone in the village to our doorstep. There is such an abundance of harmony, food, and good company that the prayers of thanksgiving for the year seem secondary to all that surrounds us. Wongmo is our honored guest, and she arrives early with Wongel by her side. She has brought many dishes, especially cooked by herself. Helping in the kitchen are my mother's good friends, Sange and Pem. They gossip and laugh as they both take turns in adding more chili to the steaming breakfast dish of Thimphu. From our kitchen, a factory line of incoming volunteer servers take endless flasks of tea and snacks out to the guests. It was all the more special because Ajimo is home, and together we were celebrating as a family. Appa and I are relaxed and enjoying the company of friends and neighbors. My Ange, not one to shy away from making good use of a ready audience, started singing with her friends. As my Age sits quietly under the shade of our old pear tree, looking with eyes full of a lifetime of love. During the harvest season, my parents work together in the fields with the help of friends and neighbors, and they look out for each other, whether it is to put a new roof over our houses look for lost cattle, or to give each other comfort and support in times of sadness and death. We coexist in a web of friendships and community, of receiving and giving. It is a perfect picture of communal living, sometimes speckled with small clouds of competition and jealousy. The dangers of living in a small society, as my mother says. Last summer, I had quarreled with a neighbor over water that would be distributed through our land. But today we put aside our differences and we celebrated the bonds of common experiences and problems that make us such a close-knit community. As the last guest stumbled out of our house late into the night, I was still wide awake, thanks to all the energy and excitement in the house. Ajimo had quietly fallen asleep, tired with a long day and keeping me company. I brought out my small wooden trunk, my treasure trove of all that was precious to me, and opened it. As I rummaged through souvenirs I had collected over the 13 years of my time on earth, I found my collection of pictures and press clippings of my kings. I then found a newspaper clipping of His Majesty the 5th Duke Gyalpo's address on the day our constitution was adopted. On the 18th July 2008, His Majesty had said in his address, "The Constitution is the most profound achievement of generation of endeavor and service. As it is granted to us today, we must remember that even more important than the wise and judicious use of the powers it confers is the unconditional fulfillment of the responsibilities we must shoulder. Only in understanding our duties will the exercise of our powers be fruitful. If we can serve our nation with this knowledge and this spirit, then an even brighter future awaits our country." I looked at the Constitution and find the section called Fundamental Rights and another called Fundamental Duties. Fundamental rights are our most basic freedoms and entitlements given to us by the Constitution. The Constitution guards these fundamental rights and therefore it can be defended in a court of law. A duty is a responsibility or obligation, something like the way of life in my village, where we work together, we give, and we take from each other in order to maintain balance and harmony as members of one community. And fundamental duties are founded on the principle of love and respect as citizens to each other and to the country. There are also duties that the government has to its citizens and to the country. But as my grandparents tell me, with duties comes responsibility. To enjoy the rights that have been given to us, we must also take our individual duties as a part of a larger community seriously. Chapter 9. Why do I need to love my country? I think of the raven I met in my dream, and I remember my journey since then. I've seen how my family, my school, my family all exist, and I see myself as being a part of all this. I look to my kings and see how they have led a life of example in the service of the people, and how our governments exist to strive to better the lives of our people. And I think about our future as a nation and importance of the direction we take. The Constitution is still a sacred document and holds a place of honor on my family altar. But now, unwrapped from the silk scarf, it has become a part of my daily existence. I accept the Constitution and the political system into which I was born. I am bound by the Constitution and its obligations not because my parents agreed to it, but because I choose to accept it. I have trust in my Constitution and I understand it as a unifying document, a guide for us all to follow a path that will ensure a peaceful and balanced existence and progress as a nation. I take a pledge and make a solemn promise. I pledge with my body, speech, and mind to be unwavering, steadfast in my efforts to strengthen the sovereignty and security of Bhutan, to secure the blessings of liberty, to ensure justice and tranquility in my country, and to enhance the unity, happiness, and well-being of my people for all time to come. I have learned to love my country because I feel I value it. I'm determined to make my contribution by keeping my pledge, my promise. As I say this, I see the raven in a far-off distance take flight and disappear into the clear blue sky. Incredible, isn't it? So simple, yet the book has just everything. And the coincidence, I felt that every word is just so powerful and so impactful for what we are going through right now, what we're going through today. So I really hope that everyone has enjoyed this book as much as I have. I would also like at this point for parents to ask questions to their children about what they have understood from this book, and children, youth, or anyone who has heard and watched this entire video, please write to us your thoughts about the book, about what you have really felt, what has inspired you. And I have something special for the 2 best emails and letters that we get. So the email address is just here right now. You can note it down and write to us. We would especially like to hear your thoughts. So thank you very much, Kadinchela, and see you soon.